We have been on a journey discussing the recipe for discipleship. We talked about some of the elements of the recipe, and for weeks now, 7 weeks almost to be exact. No, actually almost, this is the 8th week to be exact. We have gone through so many different things. The recipe started with an invitation. And as we look at this discipleship kind of process, one of the first things, and it seems so cyclical, is as we start at the end, it actually points back to the beginning. One of the first things that Jesus does for those that we've come to know as disciples is he calls them. Everybody say, come. Let me be very honest. There is no recipe for discipleship that does not start with Jesus calling. Then we begin to discuss the difference between bases and acids. So part of our discipleship then has to be us being around the things that Jesus has spoken and done, that we might be open to the realization of who he really is. It is when we're around these things, is when we are saturated in them, is as we constantly deal with them, all of a sudden now the Lord is able to communicate to us who he is. And now we have the right base. And I think one of the problems with the church, right, is sometimes we focus on one and not the other. You have folks that know all the scriptures and they become completely acidic. We become judgmental. We become self-righteous. We become looking down our nose at everybody else, and we point to the scriptures as a justification for why we are, but that means that we've forgotten who he is. And then you have folks that know who he is. They live under the grace of Jesus Christ. They recognize it is not their actions, but it is the very one that gave his life for us. And so they walk in that grace, but they run away from the teachings because they don't like how sour it is. So then we become undisciplined workers and receivers of grace. And then we wonder why the church doesn't look like anything, because the truth is you need both. Then we begin to talk about that we don't just stay there, that then we have to go into some other intentional processes as we put this stuff together. We talked about needing, that you need it, and that the proof is in the community. For many breads, they ask that after you do the mixing, after all these ingredients have been put together, that then you take that same dough and you begin to knead it. Knead it is really almost a way of pushing and pulling on the dough. What they say that this does is it allows the wheat proteins to interact with the water, and that allows for the creation of gluten proteins. And so now the thing that gluten does is it creates a structure that is both strong and elastic. And this is important because the yeast that is in the bread begins to release gases and bubbles. And if the dough is not strong enough, it cannot hold those bubbles, nor is it flexible enough that it can expand. So what happens is after you knead it, you put your dough, you let it sit, and it does something called rising. When the dough rises now, this gives it that beautiful, fluffy, and wonderful texture. This makes it light and very good to the palate because your dough has now risen. If you're not able to sufficiently knead your dough, what happens is the bread will become dry and dense and crumbly. The outcome of what you're trying to do, although you've mixed all of these wonderful ingredients together, you won't get the right process because it hasn't been kneaded. The process of proofing actually is the sitting, the waiting, the right environment that allows for the dough to do what the kneading sets it up to do. It sets it up to grow. That if it is too hot or if it is too cold, the dough won't rise correctly. And then we started to talk about other things, such as faith as a flour or a potential ingredient. And then we noticed that it overlaps. And if you start thinking about them, faith, and then we talked about worship, all of these have so many different variations. Now, come on, you would think, let's just be honest. Let's be honest. You would think, I've walked with you for some time now. I've seen you work. I'm privy to the scriptures. I know what I should be able to expect. Surely then, you're telling me that all of those things build for greater abilities of faith. The difference for the Roman officer is he didn't come in with any pretension. He didn't come in with any entitlement. He came in knowing the full depravity of who he was. And his depravity allowed him to better glimpse the fullness of who God was. Hear this. We miss faith in an amazing God because we too much believe in our own amazement. All of this, these ingredients are added together, and how we mix them is important. I think the entire goal of discipleship, that what a disciple really is a person who now lives into the fullness of worship. Because worship is not just something that happens at a particular place, but worship now is the full encompassing movement of one's life. Therefore, when we truly have the right understanding of God, everything we do becomes an act of worship. And after we've done all of that, we've mixed it all together, we've put it all there, now we actually have to get to the cooking portion. I mean, we talked a lot about the ingredients, but if you mix all this stuff together, you need it, you mix it, right? You add all the ingredients, and then you just let it sit there, you're gonna have dough. You have to put it in the oven. You gotta let it cook. What does the cooking process look like for discipleship? After we've done all of these things, what does it look like? And can I tell you, I kind of made an observation, and I figured something out. Most of us have not gone into the cooking portion of our discipleship. And when we look around, we can see the reason why we're not fully done is because we've avoided going into the oven. Pastor, what is going into the oven? I'm so glad you asked. Thank you so much. Going into the oven is the intentional time where God sends you out to be his witnesses. Now, I want you to look at me, because when we talk about things such as evangelism and sharing our faith, I think it's probably one of the most challenging and one of the most difficult things for most Christians to do. And this is exactly what our process has been talking about, right? This is all the stuff that we've been saying that we want to do, and now we want to figure out how can we better do it. It is us connecting, it is us growing, it is us serving, and it is us going out into the world as God sends us so that the world can hear the message. It may be hot, it may be challenging, but we shouldn't stop.